I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in England I am John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always a happily ever after.
Long ago and far away, there was once a fine farmhouse in which lived a rich and prosperous landlord. This man had many servants, but the one he valued most was his devoted gardener, a man who truly had green fingers. He had been with his master for many, many years and looked after the grounds and parks beautifully. The gardener had one daughter, a lovely girl called Kirsten, whom he loved above anything else. As Kirsten grew up, she and her father became very close. She would help him as he potted his plants, and he, in his turn, taught her everything he knew about plant lore. What kind of soil suited which plants liked to grow in the shade and which in the sunlight, when the plants should be taken from the greenhouse and bedded down, which flowers had the most fragrant perfumes. Kirsten was a favourite with the whole household. The chef taught her the recipes for all his secret sauces. The seamstress showed her how to embroider and to make fine laces, while the old basket weaver taught her all the skills of his craft. Kirsten was a quick and talented pupil. She was soon selling her own baskets, for no one could make them as quickly as she could. They were so beautifully woven, each with a different pattern, a real work of art. The finest basket of all that she made, she was saving for the daughter of her landlord. These two girls were very close friends, and this basket was to be a present for a very special occasion. Not only for the young mistress's 18th birthday, but also to celebrate her forthcoming engagement. Kirsten couldn't wait for the day to arrive for her to give her friend this special present. She herself had gathered and dried the flowers to make up the arrangement, and she eagerly hurried to the great house and happily entered her mistress's chamber. The young mistress was delighted with Kirsten's humble present. She realized how many hours, how much care and thought had gone into the making of this beautiful basket and pretty flower arrangement. My dear, I know it is also your birthday, and I want you to remember it too as a day of happiness. The young lady smiled at Kirsten. Please take this gift from me as a token of my love and affection for you. She gave her a lovely robe made of the finest white muslin and most delicately embroidered. Kirsten was overjoyed with her gift. She couldn't wait to take it back to her father and show him what a fine present the young mistress had given her. The gardener was overjoyed at the honours shown to his daughter. It seemed that nothing could mar their happiness on such an auspicious day. Suddenly, their young mistress burst into the room, shaking with anger. She threw down the basket, saying angrily, "How could you repay my kindness like this? My dear mother's pearl has gone, and you have taken it. Give it back to me at once." Poor Kirsten passionately protested her innocence. She had never seen the pearl. She had certainly not taken it. She begged her mistress to believe her, but the young lady was quite adamant. "Only you could have taken it," she declared. "It was there when you arrived. It had gone when you left. If you do not return it, I shall have you arrested for theft." As the young mistress stormed out, Kirsten's father comforted her as best as he could. The gardener, in great anguish, hurried to his master and pleaded for his daughter. "I have served you all these years with devotion and honesty, my lord," he cried. "Surely you cannot believe that my daughter would steal from her dear friend." "I appreciate what until now I thought was your devotion," the landlord replied. "But thieves must be punished. If my daughter's maid said it, Kirsten must be guilty. As her father, you must share the blame." The gardener went to plead with the young mistress, but she too wouldn't listen to his pleas and impatiently ordered him out of her sight. Then the bailiffs came to arrest Kirsten. Despite her pleas and cries and protestations of innocence, they dragged her away without further ado and marched her off to prison. The day that had begun so happily for Kirsten ended as a nightmare. The next morning she appeared before the magistrate's bench, where she swore to her innocence again, saying she had never seen the pearl and would certainly never steal from her dear mistress. The magistrates were moved by her obvious distress and her sincerity. Then the mistress's maid was called, and she swore that she had seen Kirsten take the pearl and slip it in her pocket. What could Kirsten say against evidence like that? It seemed quite clear that she was indeed guilty. The gardener again pleaded for his daughter and begged his master, who sat on the bench, to use his influence with the magistrates, if not for Kirsten's sake, then at least for the gardener's. And the master, moved at last by these pleas, did indeed ask the magistrates to deal leniently with young Kirsten. Anxiously she awaited the decision, praying they would not be too harsh with her. They decreed that Kirsten should not go to prison, but must repay her mistress the full price of the pearl, and that she would have to leave the district forever. The gardener wouldn't abandon his daughter to her fate. Every single precious possession that they had, all their clothes, all the money Kirsten had saved over the years, all they owned was sold to pay for the pearl. Everything, that is, except the birthday basket made for the young mistress, which Kirsten kept as a reminder of that dreadful day. Disgrace and grief enfeebled the gardener almost overnight. He had become a broken man, and Kirsten despaired for his health. They had to leave their comfortable cottage where they had spent so many happy days together. They had to leave all the plants and the grounds the gardener had so lovingly tended, and they had to find some shelter as far away as possible. The only thing that they had to console themselves in their great grief was the love that they bore for each other. On and on they travelled for many days, eating only berries and fruit to sustain themselves, never encountering a single human being or seeing any kind of dwelling, until, at long last, they spied in the distance a handsome farmhouse nestling among fields. Such was their despair that they agreed that they would throw themselves on the farmer's mercy and beg for a crust of bread before they carried on with their weary journey. The farmer and his wife were greatly moved by the picture of distress which the gardener and Kirsten presented. Instead of giving them the crust of bread they asked for, they invited them into the farmhouse to rest and have a proper meal before they carried on. The farmer himself helped the old gardener to the table. His wife eased off the old man's heavy boots. They gave the travellers a sustaining snack of bread and milk. the good wife prepared the bedding. "You must rest here with us and tell us your story," the farmer's wife said. "Who knows but that we should be able to help you in some way. Don't leave until you have fully recovered." With a great deal of tenderness, she settled Kirsten and her father down for the night. They were exhausted and had their first sound sleep for many a day. The next day, they were given their first substantial meal in days, and the gardener and Kirsten told the good couple their whole sad story and why they now had to search for a new home. The kindly pair, when they heard this tale of misfortune, made them a generous offer. "We are growing old ourselves, and our son has left us to get married and live in a distant town. We need help in the farm very badly, and in return for your work, we shall give you food and shelter." They were very agreeable, but Kirsten still could never forget the disgrace that had befallen her. It weighed very heavily on her mind, and she saw too that it was something from which her father would never fully recover. As the days passed, however, they both regained a great deal of their strength and were able to work very usefully and busily on the farm and repay the farmer and his wife for their great kindness. The gardener soon had the flower beds and vegetable plot well under control, with Kirsten, of course, helping him as she had in the old days. Kirsten once more began to weave her baskets. She was determined to earn enough money so that she could return to the farmhouse she had left and prove her innocence to her master and young mistress. She worked with such a will that she began to save quite a reasonable amount of money. Both the gardener and Kirsten became known and respected in the nearby village. Nobody accused Kirsten of being a thief. Everyone admired her for her beautiful baskets and her hard-working, cheerful nature. Now that she had time to do her basket weaving again, she seemed happier. Alas, the gardener continued to fail and grow weaker and weaker. He couldn't work as hard as he used to, and he certainly couldn't walk with Kirsten as far as the village. She realized sadly that one day soon she would be left all alone in the world. Not only was the gardener getting more feeble, so were the farmer and his wife. They were finding the hard work in the farm too much for them and wrote to their son, asking him to return with his wife and manage the farm as he used to do. This couple didn't need a second invitation. Although their arrival was eagerly awaited and they were warmly welcomed, they soon revealed themselves in their true colours. The son's wife made herself absolute mistress of the household and insisted that Kirsten wait on her hand and foot. Where the old farmer and his wife treated Kirsten with kindness and courtesy, their son and his wife behaved with arrogance and rudeness. They took over all the best rooms and made their parents eat in the kitchen. And while they feasted on the best joints, their parents had to make do with scraps. The farmer and his wife soon realized their terrible mistake in inviting the pair to the farm in the first place and feared for their future. What an unpleasant couple they were. As for poor Kirsten, her days of happiness were things of the past. Her grief was completed when she entered her father's room one morning and saw that he had passed away peacefully in the night. Kirsten wept bitterly for herself, although she realized that at last her father had found rest and happiness. She made sure that his grave was always kept beautifully neat and tidy, and marked it with the basket that had heralded the beginning of their disgrace. The son's wife behaved with extreme cruelty to her in-laws. Because they could no longer work, she threw them out of the house, and they had to find shelter as best they could in the barn. Kirsten did all she could to make their life as easy as possible, ensuring that they were kept warm and had enough food to eat. She felt she could never repay them for their past kindness, And indeed, if it hadn't been for them, she would most certainly have left the farm forever. After her father's death, Kirsten found the woman treating her even more unkindly. She forbade the girl to work at her baskets anymore, which she called loafing. She demanded that Kirsten work in the farmhouse, and she stood over her all day to make sure she did just that. If Kirsten had had to work hard enough before, she had to work twice as hard now. Kirsten was determined to continue her basket weaving, even if she had to do it by candlelight, for she knew that this was the only way she would earn enough money to return home. Kirsten's humiliation was complete when one morning the woman inspected the washing and found that a sheet was missing. "Once a thief, always a thief," she screamed at Kirsten. She brushed past the girl, pushing her out of the way. Kirsten could bear this treatment no longer. She realized she would have to leave without delay. Weeping, she told her dear friends what had happened and the reason why she had to go. "I wouldn't have abandoned you like this," she declared, "but this woman has made life impossible for me. I have tried working hard, but I cannot be called a thief." Poor Kirsten had nowhere to go, no friends to turn to. First, she had to say farewell to her father. While she wept by the graveside, a beautiful young woman dressed all in white spoke to her. "Do you recognize me, my dear? I am the mistress whom you used to love. I have come to ask your forgiveness for my cruel accusations and to beg you to come home with me." She told Kirsten how the girl's innocence had been proved. The young mistress's husband had climbed a tree to gather some blossoms for her. He had tumbled down and knocked down a bird's nest in his fall, and out of it rolled, not an egg, but a beautiful pearl. The bird had stolen it, and when the maid was questioned, she confessed that she had accused Kirsten in case she was blamed for the loss. They had searched far and wide for the gardener and his daughter, until one day the young mistress, while visiting friends, had seen the grave with its beautiful basket. "No one makes baskets like that except you, dear Kirsten. But now you must tell me what has happened since you left us." Kirsten told her what had happened and the sadness that had befallen the farmer and his wife. The Lord had jurisdiction over this part of the country too, so he immediately turned out the son and cruel wife, reinstated the good old couple, and made sure they were properly looked after and all their needs attended to. As for Kirsten, nothing was too good for her. To help her try and forget all the unhappy past, they gave her many presents and beautiful new gowns. Best of all, they gave her a lovely cottage just next to the conservatory where she could weave her baskets. The first thing she did was visit the conservatory to see how her father's plants were getting on and who was now looking after them. And there she saw a handsome gardener busily potting and pruning, and who really did seem to know almost as much about plants as her dear father had.